themselves through their clothing.
Absolutely. And young men, frankly.
Yes.
I mean, if young
anyone,
says,
or old people, anybody.
It just didn't quite sit right with me.
No.
I mean, I'm sure it's driven by good intentions, but actually it appears I think they're actually doing the opposite of what they're wanting to do.
Finally, around the panel, can you recall what you wore at a school ball?
Oh, terrible.
Yep.
I mean, it was at sort of the peak of the Frank Casey bad suits and always like a horrible, probably like a black shirt or a silver shirt. Just, And I think even once like a weird collar on my suit. Just terrible. Not even worth thinking
I can
about.
remember.
And frosted tips. Sorry.
Frosted tips.
Crikey. I remember. I can see it now.
Lol, says Ali. And he's still wearing them.
Sorry.
Cindy.
Blue silk halter neck. Remember, halter necks were the big thing. Not too plunging, because it was a bit prude. Scooped back. No slits up the sides or anything, but just fell in a casual but formal style to the ground. Look, and you know what? You could wear it today.
Philippa says it's very hard for those of us with non-ordinary bodies to fit in. Those students want to help everybody feel like they can fit in. You see, that's the point. Helen says the whole point of wearing what you want to your ball is so you can look back and cringe, right? Like Thomas just did. Leave them to their fashion faux pas.
Yeah.
What did you wear to the ball, Wallace? You can't escape without telling us.
Well, I can recall one. I can recall once in the fifth form, I decided to go right out there, and I got a Sergeant Pepper soup made.
Fantastic.
Made. Whole.
And I remember turning up, and it was very much the sort of the mid-'80s where everyone was wearing their sort of the usuals, and the whole blimmin' ball looked and was shocked.
Yeah.
And the whole night I just had people coming up to me and goes, "What on earth were you thinking?"
And you said, "Hey, I love it."
Always the individualist, huh?
Didn't scar you for life.
Yes. Karen says, loved Catherine wheels and sparklers. Yep, banned fireworks except for big public organised occasions. Maybe bring on Matariki celebration and light up the sky. Unsure how wartime animals are managed with bombs and firearms going off.
Well, they didn't. They were
Yes,
killed.
exactly. Yeah. Someone says, my favourite fireworks as a kid were not the ones throwing up my skirt, but my brother's friends, nor the skyrocket that almost hit my son in the heart. My fondest memory was setting off a whole box of them at once in a nearby park, age 28. But the fact is, it's not only dangerous for kids and inconsiderate for animals, but also extremely wasteful in terms of manufacturing. This is just one small part of a very big picture in which we as a species need to find new ways, Thomas Pryor, to entertain ourselves.
Bloody hell.
You need to find,
Gosh. Yeah.
You need to find...
By name, Thomas Pryor.
Stop texting Wallace your own show.
And just on a very brief final note, we've been ranked the second most peaceful country in the world. This by a Global Peace Index measuring the peacefulness of 163 countries. Does it surprise you?
It was too far to come and fight.
You've been.
Just,
This was done post the terror attacks.
Post-Christchurch, yeah.
Just brief thoughts on this.
I mean, I was going to ask if it was done post-Christchurch, because, I mean, I think that was why that was such a shock in so many ways, because it seems so inconsistent with what we think the New Zealand way of life is. But, no, it doesn't surprise me, actually. And whenever you return home, I think there's that wonderful feeling that there is something, quite special and peaceful about New Zealand, especially with fireworks going off.
Oh, stop it.
All right,
Stop it.
No, that's enough. All right. Cindy Mitchell and Thomas Pryor, you've been great. Wallace Chapman, see you tomorrow at 3:45. See ya.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. On tonight's program, a mental health unit where 2 patients died in suspected suicides did not bring in any extra staff to help keep patients safe, despite repeatedly claiming that it did. Israel Folau's fundraiser goes belly up. GoFundMe shuts it down and says it will refund the almost $700,000 in donations. We speak to a doctor who has legally euthanized 150 patients ahead of Wednesday's euthanasia vote, D-Day for the 23 undecided MPs. And we investigate whether an Auckland school teacher told a student vaccinations can cause autism. A young Samoan designer is eyeing up the 4 major international fashion weeks too. RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata with DNA. A mental health unit where 2 patients died and suspected suicides did not at any stage bring in more staff to help keep patients safe, despite repeatedly claiming it did. More on that story in Checkpoint. The government signalling moves to make the banking system safer for customers and to make sure executives are held to account. It's reviewing the 30-year-old laws regulating the sector to make sure they're up to scratch. A limit of between $30,000 and $50,000 for a bank deposit protection scheme is being proposed, which would cover 90% of individual deposits if a bank were to fall over. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says New Zealand is one of a few countries not to have such a scheme.
This means that Kiwis with bank deposits have no protection from the failure of a financial institution, which would be from risks beyond their control.
Jacinda Ardern. A tougher regime to make bank executives more accountable for bad behaviour or banking practices is also under consideration. A University of Auckland lecturer is calling for staff to be trained to handle students who express extreme views on campus. University staff have told RNZ they were silenced by senior management after complaining about a student with far-right views just days after the Christchurch terror attack. One of those staff members, David Maeda, says the university just isn't prepared to handle complaints of that kind. Mr Maeda says it would help for staff to know what to do when teaching people with extreme beliefs.
We need to be teaching our teachers how to handle these types of incidences that can arise, especially when we're in a society that's clearly dealing with this stuff. I mean, March 15th, although that's the most extreme example, shows that we're dealing with issues of racism and xenophobia in our society.
Auckland University lecturer David Maeda. The university says there is a significant number of processes in place and a no-tolerance approach to harassment is prioritised and regularly communicated to staff. A health researcher says free period products must be offered in primary schools as well as intermediate and secondary schools. The Positive Periods campaign launched today has 3 different proposals for combating period poverty in schools. Mariana Johnson reports.
The first option would cost over $11 million a year to provide menstruation education and sanitary products, including 25% eco-friendly options in primary through to secondary schools. The second option, at $6.8 million, does not include the eco-friendly products, while the third proposal, at almost $4.5 million, would only target intermediate and secondary schools. However, a University of Otago public health researcher, Sarah Donovan, says that any policy must include primary-age girls, as nearly 2,000 primary school girls get their period. Ko Mariana Johnson, TNA.
The Australian Christian lobby believes GoFundMe has badly misread the public mood over its decision to shut down sacked Wallaby star Israel Folau's fundraising page. Folau launched the page last week asking for $3 million to help in his legal fight against Rugby Australia. But today GoFundMe removed the page, saying Folau's campaign was in violation of its terms and conditions, and the $800,000 raised so far will be refunded. The head of the Australian Christian lobby, Martin Isles, says it's the wrong move.
The fact that Israel Folau would raise such a stunning quantity of money in such a short time tells of the fact that there's many people in the Australian community who feel as if Israel Folau's case is their case. They look at the intolerance that he's facing and they feel like their freedoms that are under threat as well.
Martin Isles says his organisation has already given to Folau's cause and stands by ready to assist further. Netball New Zealand is expected to make a statement tomorrow regarding Maria Folau's reposting of her husband's controversial online fundraising campaign. A deep magnitude 7.5 earthquake has struck in a remote area of Indonesia's Banda Sea, prompting people to run from their homes in East Timor and sparking evacuations in the Australian city of Darwin. No tsunami alert has been issued. Elizabeth Brown reports.
The quake was 220 kilometres deep and was felt strongly in the East Timor capital of Dili and parts of Indonesia, including the holiday island of Bali. It was also felt strongly in Darwin, more than 700 kilometres away, and in other parts of the Northern Territory. A number of shops, office buildings and at least one primary school in central Darwin were evacuated. Many residents say they heard a roar before the shaking began. There have been no reports of damage or injuries in any of the affected areas, but officials warn there could be aftershocks. Call Elizabeth Brown, aho.
3 schools in the Napier suburb of Onekawa were in lockdown for about 1.5 hours this afternoon. William Colenso College, Richmond Primary School and Henry Hill School were advised by the police at 2:30, and the lockdown was lifted at 4 o'clock. The police say they are still responding to an incident at an Onekawa property. There are no reports of injuries, but cordons are in place at Alexander Avenue. It's 5:05. New Zealand driver Scott Dixon hasn't given up on defending his IndyCar title just yet. Dixon spun on the first lap of today's latest round in Wisconsin and was last before fighting back to finish 5th behind winner Alexander Rossi. He is 4th in the overall standings, 94 points behind series leader American Joseph Newgarden. Dixon has had a frustrating last few races.
We definitely had more than what we showed this weekend, but if you look at Detroit race 1, easy podium there and no points. Texas, with Colton, no points there, and then having the issues this weekend. And I know that 100 mark is looming, which is not good, but you can't win them all, man. But we'll keep trying.
Scott Dixon. New Zealand golfer Lydia Ko has finished in a tie for 11th at the Women's PGA Championship in Minnesota. The world number 19 carded a final round 4 under par 68 to end on 3 under for the tournament, 6 shots behind the winner, Australian Hannah Green, who made her first LPGA Tour victory a major. The 22-year-old Green held her nerve to drain a title-sealing par putt on the last hole and beat defending champion South Korean Sung Hyun Park by 1 shot.
I'm pretty much speechless. I was really nervous playing the last 5 holes, and I'm just really happy that, I made a clutch putt, because that was kind of what was struggling through the middle of the round, and just to make the one on the last, really is surreal.
Hannah Green. And hosts France have scraped into the quarterfinals of the Women's Football World Cup with a 2-1 extra time win over Brazil. England set up a quarterfinal against Norway after beating Cameroon 3-0. That's the news.
On the road,
they go with roundabouts because they've found that the level of crashes is far less serious. They're little dings from funny little angles.
On the stage,
I had 20 minutes to teach a haka to them. With such a large crowd, I was absolutely blown away by how quickly they picked it up.
And on the field,
even though we lost, we're still happy. Yeah, we have a good time. Everybody have a good time, so it was tough.
On air and online, Morning Report with Corin Dan and Susie Ferguson, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, pioneering geneticist Dr. Ron Davis on finding a reliable blood test for chronic fatigue syndrome and the new hope for sufferers. And after 10, the godmother of Silicon Valley, Esa Wojcicki, on raising high-achieving kids. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland showers, some heavy, with possible thunderstorms in the east overnight and early tomorrow morning. For Auckland and Coromandel, mainly fine. However, showers northwest of Auckland City, about northern Coromandel Peninsula and Great Barrier Island, where some may be heavy, with possible thunderstorms overnight. For Waikato to Kapiti, including Bay of Plenty and Central High Country, fine weather. Gisborne, a few showers. Hawke's Bay, Wairarapa and Wellington, a few showers, particularly from tonight until midday tomorrow. Showers gradually clearing tomorrow and becoming fine. Fiordland and Southland, a few showers about the coasts, mainly fine with morning frosts inland. For the remainder of the South Island, mainly fine with morning frosts. Cloudy periods and isolated showers about coastal Otago, Canterbury and Marlborough tonight. Chatham Islands, cloudy periods, a few showers, clearing for a time tomorrow. You're with RNZ National. It's coming up to 9 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. A mental health unit where 2 patients died in suspected suicides did not at any stage bring in more staff to help keep patients safe, despite repeatedly claiming that it did. The men died within 4 days of each other last month at Waitemata DHB's mental health unit, He Puna Waiora. One of the men, 24-year-old Tamaki Heki, who had fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, was only being observed the minimum once an hour by nurses. That's despite his foster parents, Rita and Peter Wilcox, repeatedly telling He Puna Waiora that Tamaki was distressed by the first death and at serious risk of killing himself. There are so many unanswered questions about exactly what happened at He Puna Waiora during 1 week in May. But here's what Checkpoint has discovered so far. Tamaki Heke and the other man who died 4 days earlier at this mental health unit were under what's called hourly therapeutic observations at the time of their suspected suicides. In plain speak, at least once an hour, a registered nurse locates and engages with the patient. It is the lowest level of observation, bottom of the rung stuff. Here's Tamaki's foster mother, Rita Wilcox.
When I found out it was hourly, it was just unbelievable because he went to bed at 8:30 at night, which is very, very early. That's suspicious. And a lot can happen in an hour.
Rita, a registered nurse, has been going through Tamaki's medical notes from the week leading up to his death.
I came across around about 26, 28 events that I thought, why did they not pick up on that?
More on that later, but hourly observations is particularly significant in Tamaki Heke's case. Here's why.
He rang me, and he often would ring once or twice a day. He rang quite late for him, but he said, I want you to remember these songs. This is for my wedding, this is for my funeral, and this is for my anniversary if I ever have one.
That's Rita speaking to me last month about a phone call from Tamaki the night he died. His funeral talk was a red flag. So Rita called He Puna Waiora and warned them she thought her son was at risk of suicide.
I was given assurance that the staff are aware of this, they say, and that he is in good care. And then 3 hours later he was dead.
So on the night, you rang and asked them specifically to keep a close eye on him?
Yes.
What would you regard as a close eye, Rita?
Have him in view that he would sleep, if he wasn't in high care, which I would have thought, then he would be sleeping in the lounge observation area. That at minimum he would be there and they could have him in their sight all the time.
The DHB's own protocol details more intense observation options, including checks every 15 minutes. There's also what they call continuous engagement, so round-the-clock observation. And in acute cases, a patient must be within arm's reach of an assigned staff member at all times. Among the reasons given for escalating monitoring are active or imminent risk of self-harm, or having the intent and plan to commit suicide. Remember, Tamaki's mum, a registered nurse, believes in the week leading up to his death, there were more than 20 warning signs in her son's medical notes.
Him saying that he was feeling suicidal or that he wasn't engaging with people, that he was... they said that he appears to be actively seeking ways to harm himself. He wasn't only seeking it out, but on the 16th at about 11 o'clock in the morning, he actually said to them, I just want to die.
He was that explicit?
Yeah.
And that's in his notes?
Yes.
Yet the night he died, he was still only on hourly observations?
Yes. He should have been on constant observation, and he wasn't. And I was shocked when I found out. I had no idea that he was not on constant monitoring.
The DHB says in the cases of both patients who died, the hourly observations were completed to the assigned level and each patient was seen by staff well within the time frame. When it comes to staff, during the morning and afternoon shift on a general ward at He Puna Waiora, where Tamaki was when he died, there is a minimum of 1 registered nurse for every 5 patients. That's about 12 nurse minutes an hour per patient. It's also DHB protocol for nurses to aim to spend 1 hour face-to-face with each of their patients per shift. On night shift, it's 1 registered nurse for every 9 patients on the general mental health ward.
It just doesn't compute that they can do a good hour sitting there talking to them. I know they only have to do like 5-10 minute blocks, but even so, it's a lot of time in their 8.5-hour shift.
After the 2 suspected suicides at He Puna Waiora, Waitemata DHB's Acting Director of Mental Health Services, Dr Kevin Cleary, told me the day after Tamaki's death that immediate steps had been taken to ensure patient safety, including boosting staff.
We have put in extra staffing, because we know from our experience this is very traumatic for patients on the unit, for staff, and for the families of our patients. And we want to make sure that we can reduce the risk as much as possible.
It's important because Tamaki's foster parents say he was a known copycat and therefore at higher risk after the suspected suicide. As the interview went on, Dr Cleary doubled down on that claim. More staff had been brought in. How many more staff than usual have you boosted numbers to?
We have boosted numbers appropriately for the unit at this point in time. And obviously...
And what's that?
And that is, we have assessed the risk of the patients on the ward, and we have added the number of staff that we feel is appropriate.
Checkpoint asked for details of those increased staffing levels. The DHB responded but did not provide this information, so we asked again. Here's the DHB statement.
No additional staff were required after the first death. After the second death, several replacement staff were brought in to perform the work of those going on sick leave. The unit was fully staffed at all times.
So, 0 extra staff. Contrary to the repeated claims of Dr Cleary, not a single extra staff member was brought into the mental health unit after the first death. And after the second death, replacements for those on sick leave, but no extras. Waitemata DHB says after both deaths, all patients in He Puna Waiora had risk assessments, and those considered most vulnerable were identified and plans made to manage their risk. During that week, Tamaki's mother says his notes do show he spent a short time in He Puna Waiora's special high-risk mental health ward, meaning he would have been more closely monitored, but he was back on his usual ward when he died. In our earlier interview, Dr Cleary said this about telling patients and their families about the first suspected suicide.
We have spoken to all of the patients on the unit, and we have spoken to their families, and have explained to them what has happened and what we are doing, and what we're doing to make sure that we have reduced the risk.
But Tamaki's parents only found out about the suspected suicide when their son posted a worrying Facebook message the day after the death, saying how sorry he was the patient had died and that he hadn't been there to help. Rita called He Puna Waiora then too, warning them to watch her son, who was a known copycat. The DHB is now backing away from Dr Cleary's claim all the families were told.
Families are not routinely informed in the case of serious adverse events occurring on hospital wards.
After Checkpoint's initial interview with Tamaki's parents, the DHB contacted us, asking if we'd like to withdraw our Official Information Act request, given we had canvassed the issues already. We said no.
We haven't had any word from the unit or from Waitemata. We haven't had contact with them. We haven't been able to go and talk to them about what happened. Nobody's offered us appointments or, rung up to see how you're going.
For Rita Wilcox too, there are many more unanswered questions. The main one, how could this possibly happen?
And just because of one thing that they didn't do, they're putting him in high care. When he obviously needed to be there by all the comments, the warnings that I gave them, he just slipped through the net and, managed to take his own life.
And that's Rita Wilcox. If you need help in any way, you can call Lifeline. The number is 0800 543 354. 0800 543 354. You can also free call or text 1737. That number again, 1737, anytime to speak to a trained counsellor for any reason. We asked Dr Kevin Cleary on the show to clarify his statements. Late this afternoon, Waitemata DHB declined the invitation, saying Dr Cleary was on leave and out of the country. In a statement, it said after the second death at He Puna Waiora, they closed the unit to new admissions for just over a week, meaning that staff-to-patient ratios were lower than they would have been normally, as there was still a full complement of staff and fewer admissions. We should also note that the DHB has launched 2 independent external reviews into the deaths. It is 5:20 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. As always, we'd love to hear from you. If you've got views on what you've heard on the program so far, you can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. GoFundMe has taken down the Australian rugby star Israel Folau's controversial fundraising page. Last week, he launched a campaign asking people to donate $3 million to fight Rugby Australia over the termination of his contract. Folau was sacked last month for comments on social media, including claiming that homosexuals are destined for hell unless they repent for their sins. The ABC's Rachel Mealy has the latest developments.
GoFundMe Australia issued a statement about Israel Folau's campaign today. It says, "We will be closing Israel Folau's campaign and issuing full refunds to all donors. After a routine period of evaluation, we have concluded that this campaign violates our terms of service. As a company, we are absolutely committed to the fight for equality for LGBTIQ+ people and fostering an environment of inclusivity. While we welcome GoFundMe's engaging in diverse civil debate, we do not tolerate the promotion of discrimination or exclusion." Israel Folau announced last week that he had set up a GoFundMe page for his fighting fund.
My fight with Rugby Australia to defend my right to practice my religion has so far cost my wife, Maria, and me over $100,000 in legal fees. If you want to join this journey with me to fight for the right to freedom of religion, please donate. Thank you and God bless.
His announcement sparked a backlash from prominent figures and former teammates who argued Israel Folau had started the fight with Rugby Australia and other fundraising causes were more justified. But the Australian Christian lobby supported the fundraising drive. Martin Isles says many supporters had been asking how they could donate to help Israel Folau's predicament.
Look, I think it's very concerning that GoFundMe would seek to close down a page that is raising money for a legitimate legal defence under Australian law. Israel Folau has a right to defend himself. The laws of this land enable him to do that, and it's a perfectly reasonable and legitimate avenue of legal defence. We've often enjoyed the rule of law. We've always enjoyed fair trial. We've enjoyed religious freedom. And if those things are to change, they should change through a legitimate democratic process. It shouldn't be through no platforming from an organisation like GoFundMe.
And that was Martin Isles from Australia's Christian Lobby, ending that report from Rachel Mealy. A University of Auckland lecturer is calling for staff to be trained to handle students who express extreme views on campus. University staff have told RNZ they were silenced by senior management after complaining about a student with far-right views just days after the Christchurch terror attack. One of those staff members, David Maeda, says the university just isn't prepared to handle complaints of that kind. Katie Scotcher reports.
David Maeda, a lecturer at the University of Auckland, says it took management almost a month to formally take action after staff complained about a student sending threatening emails and interrupting a tutorial to express his extreme views on immigration and colonisation.
It wasn't that there was a lag in addressing this. It was that after this got to the highest level of management, it just didn't seem like the policies and procedures were established to deal with this.
The incident took place 5 days after the Christchurch shootings. The student, who isn't at the university anymore, interrupted a tutorial as white supremacy was being discussed and said Māori have no right to land and that he doesn't believe in the Treaty of Waitangi. He later sent threatening, transphobic and misogynistic emails to staff. The emails also detailed the student's views on immigration and the Islamic faith. The university investigated the incident and asked the student to apologise to staff, and he was given a list of behavioural requirements to follow. Mr Maeda says the University of Auckland and other universities don't know where to stand on the free speech versus hate speech debate.
Universities are historically supposed to be spaces where controversial opinions are free to be expressed and debated. And so there's that element that comes into this whole issue, that if there's any place where freedom of expression is paramount, it should be in a university setting.
He says traditionally, universities have been a place where students can freely express their views.
We have to ask, should they be able to express controversial opinions? And if so, can they do it in ways that are acceptable?
He says the current hate speech laws weigh in on how the university responds.
The university, I think, is having to deal with, what are the existing laws and what are our existing rules in the university around something that could be understood as hate speech, and how do we handle that from a legal perspective in the moment with the law as it stands right now.
David Maeda says staff need to be trained on how to deal with students with extreme views.
We need to be teaching our teachers, whether that's people like myself who are lecturers or graduate teaching assistants, how to handle these types of incidences that can arise, especially when we're in a society that's clearly dealing with this stuff. I mean, March 15th, although that's the most extreme example, shows that we're dealing with issues of racism and xenophobia in our society.
Enzo Giordani from the Tertiary Education Union says he'd like to see the institution approach complaints with more humanity.
To look at how people are feeling and to show that they care a little bit more rather than just trying to shut things down.
The university says there are a significant number of processes in place around these situations, and a no-tolerance approach to harassment is prioritised and regularly communicated to staff. It says it has tested policies and processes to act against incidences of harassment, discrimination and bullying, and to ensure that all parties are treated fairly when a complaint is laid. The university says it is aware the line between freedom of speech and harmful speech is both a matter of academic debate and a practical application. It says it encourages this debate as part of its role as the critic and conscience of society. I tamaki makoto mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Katie Scott Churaho.
An Auckland high school has been accused of spreading misinformation about vaccines during a Year 12 English class. A support staffer was working with an autistic student at Takapuna Grammar School when she says she heard the teacher tell the class there was evidence that vaccines cause autism. The school says the discussion came out of a project which was looking at dissenting voices, but the support staffer says misinformation was clearly being spread. Nita Blake-Person reports.
The incident is alleged to have happened during a Level 2 English class at Takapuna Grammar School on Friday the 14th of June. A support staffer who was in the classroom but doesn't want to be named says students were working on research projects relating to a range of topics. Some looked at smoking, others were focused on vaccines. The class was busy with their assignments when the teacher asked one student to consider a different viewpoint on vaccinations.
She's like, okay, well, have you really looked into why people are against vaccinations? And he was like, no, not really. And then they went back and forth a little bit about why he hadn't looked into it yet. And she's like, well, there are some pretty valid reasons why people are not liking the idea of vaccination. There's been evidence to show that vaccines can cause autism. And I jumped in and I was like, pardon me, inaccurate. And I did a whole spiel on how that's not correct.
But the support staffer says she explained to the teacher the study had been proven to be entirely false, and she says the teacher didn't stop there.
She said, well, there is other reasons as well that people think that vaccines can be harmful and that they might not want to vaccinate. And that was about it. So I'm not totally sure on her position as an anti-vaxxer or not, but I do know that what was being said was a little bit unnerving.
The support staffer says it was concerning for her to see misinformation being spread at the school, which has more than 1,600 students.
Everyone's allowed to have their own beliefs, and that's totally fine. But I do think that someone might need to step in and be like, hey, maybe maybe we shouldn't be spreading inaccurate information in our classrooms. To hear comments made like this at the same time as a measles outbreak in your country, in New Zealand, is definitely unnerving.
No one from Takapuna Grammar would be interviewed for this story, but in a statement said the class was the focus of an assessment activity which required consideration of different perspectives.
The title of this assessment is Dissenting Voices. A student selected the anti-vax movement as their area of inquiry, and the teacher explained the different perspectives that could be taken into account, one being the now discredited scientific evidence produced in 1998. This was not presented as evidence of the connection, but was referred to as one of the pieces of information he could consider that has contributed to the debate.
But the support staffer says that wasn't what she observed.
She was giving this information to a student as if it was still accurate, and she didn't even realize that she was giving the student inaccurate information about it until I told her that the doctor had lost his doctorate license because he admitted to falsifying all of his research.
The director of the Immunisation Advisory Centre, Dr. Nikki Turner, says it's vital myths around vaccines are dispelled and that people who are spreading information have their facts straight.
We've got overwhelming scientific evidence, a large amount of good studies that do not show a link between the vaccine and autism. The problem we have is myths never die. This was a myth that was created back in the 1990s, and it appears to have got embedded in everybody's minds, and it's very hard to shift the myth.
In a statement, the Ministry for Education said it encouraged anyone with concerns about what their child was being taught to speak with the child's teacher in the first instance and follow the school's complaints process. For Checkpoint, Nita Blakeperson.
Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, operators and former employees say the Civil Aviation Authorities is imploding amid reports of high staff turnover and a toxic workplace. Campaigners against period poverty reiterate calls for the government to offer free sanitary items in all schools. And a young Samoan designer is headhunted for 4 major international fashion weeks. But there's a financial catch. We would love your feedback on Israel Folau and his fundraising campaign, or staffing issues in mental health facilities, whatever you'd like to get in touch about. You can text us on 2101, you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Gary has already got in touch about period poverty, and Gary says if schoolgirls cannot afford sanitary products, get them to give up their cell phones. It's not up to taxpayers to fund them. Thanks, Gary. Here's Susanna with the headlines.
The government plans to bring in a deposit guarantee scheme to protect customers if a bank goes under. It will also consider a tougher regime to make bank executives more accountable for bad behaviour or objectionable banking practices. The government is proposing a limit of between $30,000 and $50,000 for the guarantee scheme, which would cover 90% of individual bank deposits. A University of Auckland lecturer says academic institutions don't know where to stand on the free speech versus hate speech debate. University staff say they were silenced by senior management after complaining about a student with far-right views shortly after the Christchurch terror attack. David Maeda says they are ill-equipped because universities have historically been a place where students can freely express their views. Netball New Zealand is expected to comment tomorrow on Maria Folau's reposting of her husband's controversial online fundraising campaign. The Silver Ferns shooter is married to former Wallabies fullback Israel Folau, whose contract was ended last month over a social media post with homophobic content. Folau last week started a GoFundMe campaign, but the website has now shut down the fundraiser, which aimed to raise $3 million for his legal battle with Rugby Australia. Maria Folau reposted the campaign on social media on Friday. A mental health unit where 2 people died in suspected suicides did not bring in more staff, contrary to its claims that it did. The men died within 4 days of each other last month at the Waitemata DHB's mental health unit, He Puna Waiora. The DHB says after the deaths they stopped new admissions for about a week, so staff to patient ratios were lower than normal. He Puna Waiora has launched 2 independent external reviews into the deaths. A deep magnitude 7.5 earthquake has struck in a remote area of Indonesia's Banda Sea, prompting people to run from their homes in East Timor and sparking evacuations in the Australian city of Darwin. No tsunami alert has been issued. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. It's time for business now with Madison Reedy. Hi, Madison.
Hello.
This is really interesting. The Reserve Bank is enforcing an independent review of the country's largest bank, ANZ. So does it have anything to do with the recent publicity around the boss there, David Hisco?
I think anything to do with ANZ this week has something related to David Hisco abruptly leaving. In fact, this time last Monday, that happened actually. So the Reserve Bank has asked ANZ to produce 2 reports to be reviewed by a third party, which hasn't been named yet. Now, that's to ensure that it's being run carefully, prudently, and in line with the Reserve Bank's regulations. Now, the first report is over compliance with capital requirements. Now, if you remember last month, the Reserve Bank quite openly named and shamed, the official word is censured, ANZ over failing to use approved internal models to calculate its risk, to calculate the amount of reserve capital that it has to hold as essentially a safety net for its loan book. Now, that forced ANZ to increase its capital requirements by $277 million to a total of $760 million. So there was quite a financial repercussion there. The second report is in regards to management. So this is possibly where David Hisco comes in. So specifically what the Reserve Bank is asking them to detail in this report is the effectiveness of ANZ's director attestation process. Fancy word, but essentially that's the checks that the ANZ board has to do, the sign-off process for those capital requirement calculations. Now, ANZ obviously failed in doing that. Sir John Key, who is the chairman of ANZ, has said that they did fail to do that. But if you can also
said
remember,
it was a junior staffer. He said it was a junior staffer.
So, and that was actually despite the Reserve Bank saying, actually directly blaming the ANZ board for that failing there. And also in regards to David Hisco, this is obviously the background of ANZ over the past week. We're not sure if this particular report about management will detail David Hisco's departure and its processes around that, but it will look at our internal governance and risk management. Now, ANZ says that it welcomes this independent review by the Reserve Bank, but this is quite a hard line that the Reserve Bank's taking here. The power that it has to enforce this independent review of ANZ, it used what's called Section 95 within the Reserve Bank of New Zealand Act. Now, that actually does come with, if ANZ doesn't comply, I'm sure it will, but if any bank that is whipped with this particular section, if it doesn't comply, it could come with a fine of up to $2 million. So pretty heavy-handed, that section. The last time the Reserve Bank used this was on Westpac in late 2017 when they were censured for pretty much the exact same thing that ANZ has been censured for this year. Now, I think that the Royal Commission of Inquiry into Misconduct of Banking in Australia and the similar follow-up review that we had into conduct and culture in New Zealand, both of those are really just upped the ante that regulators on both sides of the Tasman are having to take against banks, and obviously ANZ, our largest one here, is Australian owned. Now, we actually had an update on that culture and conduct review this afternoon too. Now, we found out that all banks have actually now promised to scrap sales incentives for frontline staff and their managers. Now, that was the result of that conduct and culture review that was done in conjunction with the FMA and the Reserve Bank. Now, speaking to the FMA this afternoon, now they did tell us that some banks did have to be persuaded to scrap sales incentives, but obviously they didn't name and shame there. But within that update, Adrian Orr, the governor of the Reserve Bank, he took this opportunity this afternoon to take a bit of a shot at bank executives. And I'll quote what he said here. He said, "Culture comes from the top, and boards and senior managers at our financial institutions need to be leading by example. There is a much bigger concern and question about the culture being instilled and fostered at a governance level." Adrian Orr is not one to mince his words, and he certainly didn't do that today.
Right. Hey, quickly, can you give us the numbers from the market and the dollar?
The NZX Top 50 Index closed at a new record high, actually, tonight. It rose 0.6%. That's a rise of 61 points to close at 10,388. The New Zealand dollar, that's buying at 66 US cents, 51.8 British pence, and 94.9 to the Australian. Iran.
Thanks, Maddie. That's Madison Reedy with our business update. The US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is on his way to the Middle East for talks with key allies amid escalating tensions with Iran. Mr. Pompeo will visit both Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. Washington is expected to announce further economic sanctions on Iran to try to prevent the country from developing nuclear weapons. Here's the BBC's Chris Buckler from Washington.
Having backed away from military strikes, America is trying to show it's not afraid of conflict with Iran. Officials say they launched cyber attacks, which they claim disabled Iranian systems, controlling rockets and missile launchers. Exactly the kind of hardware that was responsible for shooting down an American drone over the Gulf. With Tehran showing off the wreckage and President Trump threatening Iran with obliteration if this ends up in confrontation, the international community is increasingly worried.
Everybody must keep nerves of steel. It's absolutely essential to avoid any form of escalation. The world cannot afford a major confrontation in the Gulf.
The British Foreign Minister Andrew Morrison has been meeting diplomats in Tehran, trying to urge calm and diplomacy. But there seemed little appetite for that in the Iranian parliament, where they chanted "Death to America." Meanwhile, with its build-up of military might in the Gulf, the US appears to be doing all it can to demonstrate that it's ready for war.
Neither Iran nor any other hostile actor should mistake U.S. prudence and discretion for weakness. No one has granted them a hunting license in the Middle East.
There is a clear divide inside the White House. President Trump was the one who called off the retaliatory strike, but most of his senior advisors wanted them. And that's resulted in a mixed message being sent to Tehran. At times, the Trump administration appears to be tentatively offering a hand of friendship, even as it shakes its fist.
We're prepared to negotiate with no preconditions. They know precisely how to find us, and I am confident that at the very moment they're ready to truly engage with us, we'll be able to begin these conversations.
The US Secretary of State is now on his way to the Middle East in an attempt to calm the waters in the Gulf. But with concerns of further attacks following explosions on tankers and Iran threatening to breach the terms of its internationally agreed nuclear deal, relationships between Tehran and Washington will be tested, if any exist at all.
It is about 19 minutes away from 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Do let us know your thoughts on anything you've heard on the program. You can text us on 2101. David Seymour's end-of-life choice bill is predicted to pass its second reading on Wednesday as undecided MPs plan to hear the bill debated in detail. Many MPs who couldn't make their mind up at the first reading voted in favour of voluntary euthanasia, although the support is not expected to be as strong this time around. Alex Perrottet has run the numbers and canvassed experts' views from around the country and overseas, including a doctor who has legally euthanised 150 people.
Euthanasia, assisted dying, physician-assisted suicide, going earlier than nature's plan, taking control, intervening, state-sanctioned killing. These and many other titles and alleged euphemisms abound as MPs ponder which way they will vote on Wednesday. So how will they vote? Labor MP and chair of the Māori caucus, Willie Jackson, told Checkpoint his mother's illness might be enough to change his mind, as he never believed in it before. He says he'll vote it through on Wednesday to listen to the debate, but probably won't vote for it at the final stage. He says the Māori caucus is split right down the middle.
You know, we just talk frankly. We've heard both sides in terms of the debate. We had Ruth Dyson came and had a good kōrero with us, which was neat. We really appreciated Ruth. And then we had Huhana Hiki and a Māori delegation, and we really, really respected their views. So we have both sides in terms of our Māori caucus. We don't have, a strong lobbyist either side. There's just total respect for everyone's position.
Of the 120 MPs, 54 have told us explicitly that they will vote through the bill. Some because they're staunch supporters, others like Willie Jackson because they want to hear the debate. 43 MPs have made it clear they will oppose it. 23 MPs won't say how they're voting or say they're still undecided. Now, if those MPs vote the same way they did last time, David Seymour's bill will sail through by 70 votes to 50. The question is, have they been convinced either way? For the sake of those 23 fence-sitters, here's where the stakeholders stand. Euthanasia is a serious no-no for the vast majority of medical associations. The New Zealand Medical Association has consistently opposed it. Its current chair, Kate Baddock, says that has not changed and will not.
It would be impossible to craft a law that completely protects people from subtle coercion, and it is also impossible to craft a law that completely means that people are totally competent. So therefore, there should be no law. There should not be euthanasia.
She's backed up by the Secretary-General of the World Medical Association, Dr. Ottmar Kloiber.
We have a huge and overwhelming majority which says, no, this is not for us and doctors should not be involved in killing patients, even so the patients are asking for that. That is a very clear and very broad view which we have.
Australian ethicist Dr. Margaret Somerville spent 40 years in Canada and has 9 doctorates and says it's not over the top to use the word killing.
This is a momentous decision to say that you will allow intentional killing. You've got to be clear what we really are authorising. I mean, this voluntary assisted dying, we all want assistance in dying. And then that you give it to the medical profession, the healers in our society, it's a radical change in our most fundamental values.
But there are groups in New Zealand who support the bill, or at least are resigned to it being voted into law. Keri Nuku, kai whakahaere of the New Zealand Nurses Association, says it's inevitable.
And should the consumer choose to want to use this end-of-life choice, then the nurses have to be prepared to support them. And if that compromises your ethical, professional, religious values, then you have the right to remove yourself, just as you do currently within the abortion legislation.
But there are doctors who are concerned that conscientious objection is not entirely protected in the current bill. Dr. Sinead Donnelly heads up Doctors Say No, a group of more than 1,000 doctors who've signed an online letter saying that euthanasia will change the role of the doctor dramatically.
When euthanasia is on the table, they will say, I wish it's all over and I want euthanasia. And based on the legislation as described, or the bill, it's not in there that we're allowed to engage with the patient in a normal therapeutic way and saying, well, let's explore that and work deeply. We're required in this bill to move along once the person requests it into the process. So we're no longer professionals using our clinical judgment, we're technicians.
But Marion Street, a former MP and supporter of the bill, says conscientious objection has its limits.
Just because they don't agree with a patient's choice, they can't abandon that patient. That is unethical. That is unprofessional. That is supremely challengeable in my view. They don't talk about that. But all they worry about is their own complicity. What about the patient?
Marion Street is the president of End of Life Choice Society and is hosting Dr. Stephanie Green, a Canadian euthanasia doctor who has legally euthanised 150 patients. Dr. Green says the patient's wishes must trump what doctors think about their role.
What's most important is what the people want, not so much what the doctors want, to be honest. And certainly we have our share of doctors who also are uncomfortable with this care. And usually these are physicians who have ulterior motivation or personal objection to the care, which I fully respect and would never ask them to be involved.
Dr. Green says the system in Canada is tried and tested and rigorous.
We have no evidence of any expansion of any eligibility criteria anywhere that's being considered. We have no evidence of any misuse or abuse of the system. We have over 8,000 deaths, and no clinician or healthcare practitioner has been charged with any misuse or abuse of the system. We see the process is rigorous in that about at least a third of the people who are asking for an assisted death are not receiving it because they probably don't qualify or they've died while they're being assessed for a number of reasons.
But there's reports that Canada's government has received expert panel reports from the Council of Canadian Academies looking at extending medical assistance in dying to people under the age of 18, considered by doctors to be capable of making their own minds up, as well as people with psychiatric conditions. Dr. Margaret Somerville says she's not surprised there have been no reports in Canada of abuses.
It's very hard to know how many deaths by euthanasia are carried out not in accordance with the law. If you go through a stop sign, you don't rush to the police and say, hey, by the way, I ran a red light or I didn't stop at a stop sign. And the same thing's true for euthanasia. When you do it and it's not in accordance with the law, you don't rush out and tell people.
Dr. Ottmar Kloiber from the World Medical Association is warning MPs here not to open the floodgates.
We have seen promises that doctors would not be coerced. We have seen promises that, for instance, vulnerable patient group like children or psychiatric patients would not be involved. All of this goes down the drain very rapidly. I fully agree with the New Zealand Medical Associations. It is impossible to put those safeguards which they are promising in place. If you go onto this way, it is a very slippery slope.
Those concerns about coercion and vulnerability are shared by some in the legal community. Here's public lawyer Grant Illingworth QC.
This is a very serious issue. Mistakes about whether to live or die can never be undone, and that's why we abolished the death penalty in this country. The kind of legislation that's currently before Parliament must contain safeguards that are so clear and so comprehensive that any possibility of deaths occurring by mistake is excluded beyond a reasonable doubt. The statute proposed by David Seymour fails to meet that standard by a very wide margin, in my opinion.
Criminal law professor Warren Brookbanks.
It authorises the killing of people who have done no wrong. And, of course, the criminal law historically has prosecuted for offences of homicide, and murder has always been top on that list as the intentional killing of a person. And however much we massage it, euthanasia authorises the killing of people to relieve their suffering and their pain. But it's very hard to disguise the reality of what's actually happening.
Elder law expert Ian McIntosh.
What the bill purports to do is protect vulnerable older people from coercion. In my view, it does not go anywhere near enough to adequately do that. And I think there is certainly a danger of scope creep once you start permitting voluntary euthanasia or assisted dying.
Len Anderson is the lawyer who represented Sean Davison, the man who was convicted of assisting his terminally ill mother to die in Dunedin in 2006 and who's just pleaded guilty to 3 more charges of assisted suicide in South Africa. Len Anderson says there'll be even more court cases if the law changes.
It is such a contentious issue that I can imagine there will be litigation and injunctions sought by family members if the bill passes, claiming that the illness is not terminal or claiming that the length of life is wrongly assessed at less than 6 months or various other things. And I can just see it as very problematic, and it would be a very brave doctor that actually agreed to administer a lethal dose in a situation where there was such a risk of litigation.
David Seymour has indicated that there will be some amendments to his bill, saying he's willing to restrict it to the terminally ill, even though advocates say the inclusion of those with grievous and irreversible conditions is important. Dr. Jack Havel from End of Life Choice Society says if the bill was narrowed, it would be discriminatory.
It'd be a very great pity if that is taken out of the bill, because it does involve quite a few people who suffer enormously. An example would be severe respiratory disease.
Other international experts say David Seymour's bill needs a lot of work. Robert Preston is a former civil servant in Britain and was tasked with investigating the international experience on euthanasia for the British Parliament. Mr. Preston says the process convinced him that no legislature should touch euthanasia, and now he's the director of a think tank called Living and Dying Well. He says he's surprised the bill has been voted through to second reading and it should go back to the drawing board.
It's slightly surprising this bill has got as far as your Parliament in the state it's in. I mean, Parliament here wouldn't even entertain a bill like this. Parliament has rejected assisted dying bills in recent years with much more restrictive provisions than Mr. Seymour's bill. His bill is very wide-ranging in its parameters. Its provisions are so wide open and so ill thought out that it needs a complete rethink.
Robert Preston says in the Netherlands, 1 in 22 deaths are now from euthanasia, but Marion Street says that's nothing to worry about, considering its ageing population.
I think people who look at overseas stats, as I encourage people to do, also need to look at the overseas context. There is an ageing population in the Netherlands, as everywhere there is an ageing population. And so it is hardly surprising that under their jurisdiction, in their legal circumstances, there may be an uptake in the numbers of people who are seeking assisted dying.
There are palliative doctors in New Zealand who support the end-of-life choice bill and say they're willing to participate, but they're cautious of speaking out before it becomes legal. The Palliative Care Council of New Zealand and Hospice New Zealand are strongly against euthanasia. Dr Rod McLeod from Auckland's Hibiscus Hospice says euthanasia does not address the real problem, which is that pain is often not the main motive.
Internationally, we know that the requests for euthanasia are not often related to physical symptoms. They're more often related to being a burden, not wanting to lose dignity, those sort of psychosocial issues. You know, there isn't a medication for that. What we do is provide compassionate listening care near the end of life. What we can be sure of is that people aren't left alone. I think that's one of the fears that people have. The second fear is that people feel that they might be a burden. And I think we want to be sure that we don't create a society where people continue to feel that they're a burden.
But Dr Stephanie Green, who's been practising euthanasia in Canada, says the law needs to change so doctors like her can emerge from underground and patients who want euthanasia can get it.
The truth is, we're kind of coming out of the closet. This is being done in a way that's unregulated and unmonitored already. And one of the reasons it's important is that so we can have a regulated system, one that's legally binding with a careful, rigorous process that has oversight and monitoring, and physicians don't need to feel that they're acting quietly in the background as criminals.
The second reading vote will most likely be on Wednesday, and if the bill's opponents want it voted down, they'll have to convince a solid majority of the undecided MPs to vote no. If the bill is voted through, it will proceed to the Committee of the Whole House, where all MPs will debate and vote on the bill in detail. For Checkpoint, Alex Perrottet.
I imagine all of you listening will have strong views on that. Would you like this bill to go forward to progress into law? Let us know your thoughts. Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. A young Samoan designer from Lower Hutt has been given a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to head to the 4 major international fashion weeks. Ina Malama hopes to take her streetwear collection, Unfiltered Man, to the catwalks with Oxford Fashion Studios, a company that works to put emerging designers on the map. But as Katie Doyle reports, there's a hefty price tag attached.
New York, London, Paris and Milan seem like a world away from Lower Hutt, but for one young designer, they're closer than ever. Ina Malama graduated from university this year with her final collection, Unfiltered Man, an array of pastel-coloured streetwear encouraging creativity and emotion.
I wanted to create a collection that didn't really have any labels on men. I researched it and kind of found out how there's a big connection between masculine stereotypes and fashion. And in fashion, they applied it heavily. So they kind of encourage a culture of conformity, making men wear clothes that are darker because it keeps them looking masculine to stay into that gender norm.
Her designs caught the eye of the UK-based organisation Oxford Fashion Studios, who reached out after seeing her designs on Instagram. They asked if Ina would be interested in showing Unfiltered Man alongside the 4 major international fashion weeks: London, Milan, Paris and New York.
They review over 40,000 applications a year, and although I never applied because I actually had never heard of it, they invited me anyway because they wanted me to do it, but because I hadn't applied, they just sent me an invitation and said, do you want to represent us? And I was like, of course I would. So I could either go to all 4 of them or I can just choose one.
For a young designer, showing at even one of these is no small feat. They're frequented by industry heavyweights like Vogue editor Anna Wintour. Ina says the chance to show her collection there would be life-changing.
This is like my biggest dream. I never imagined I would be given this opportunity, especially so young in my career. Just going on this would not only help launch my career, it would open me up to endless opportunities that I guess not many people would probably get, in New Zealand.
But there's a catch. Ina's eyeing up New York because of its rich streetwear history, but securing a spot will set her back thousands of dollars.
Trying to raise $18,000 to pay for the overall package, which includes like your runway fee, it includes going to model castings, casting the models, props, music, lighting, and also you get special interviews with the media and press team backstage.
She's currently working to raise the money, which includes a $6,000 deposit due in the next 4 months. Ina's also set up a Give a Little page and says while it's not going to be easy finding the money, she has faith that her hard work will pay off. For Checkpoint, Katie Doyle.
And just an update from the police about an ongoing incident in Onikawa, Napier. The Armed Offenders Squad and the police negotiation team are in attendance, and there are apparently cordons in place at Alexander Avenue. Residents who can't get to their houses and need to keep warm, they're being told they can go to King's House Church at 190 Riverbend Road, which apparently is opposite Puke Moki Marae. And people who are inside that cordon, police are appealing to you to remain indoors until this incident is resolved, and they will let you know when that happens. There were kids in lockdown as well. More in the news.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Lei Atawa tēnei. The police continuing to respond to an incident at a property in Onikawa, Napier, after 3 schools went into lockdown in the area this afternoon. The police were called to the area at around 2:15. William Colenso College, Richmond Primary School and Henry Hill School went into lockdown, and that was lifted after 1.5 hours. The police attention shifted to an Alexander Road property with the Armed Offenders Squad and a police negotiation team in attendance. Cordons are in place at Alexander Avenue. Residents who cannot return home can gather at the King's House Church on Riverbend Road, opposite the entrance to Puke Moki Marae. Residents currently inside the cordons are asked to remain indoors until the incident is resolved. The government has signalled moves to make the banking system safer for customers and to make sure executives are held to account. Cabinet today signed off in principle decisions as part of the second phase of its review of the Reserve Bank Act, including a deposit guarantee scheme. Political reporter Yvette McCullough has more.
The government's proposing a limit of between $30,000 and $50,000 for the deposit protection regime, which would cover 90% of individual bank deposits if a bank were to fall over. Cabinet has also decided it will look into whether the Reserve Bank's supervisory regime and its enforcement tools are tough enough to discourage bad behaviour from banks and their executives. Final decisions on the full deposit protection regime and strengthened accountability standards will be announced early next year. From Parliament, Yvette McCullough.
A University of Auckland lecturer says academic institutions don't know where to stand on the free speech versus hate speech debate. University staff have told RNZ they were silenced by senior management after complaining about a student with far-right views just days after the Christchurch terror attack. One of those staff members, David Maeda, says the university is ill-equipped to handle complaints of that kind. Mr Maeda says the University of Auckland and other universities have historically been a place where students can freely express their views.
Universities are historically supposed to be spaces where controversial opinions are free to be expressed and debated. And so there's that element that comes into this whole issue, that if there's any place where freedom of expression is paramount, it should be in a university setting.
Auckland University lecturer David Maeda. The university says it encourages the debate of freedom of speech and harmful speech as part of its role as the critic and conscience of society. Netball New Zealand is expected to make a statement tomorrow regarding Maria Folau's reposting of her husband's controversial online fundraising campaign. The Silver Fern shooter is married to former Wallabies fullback Israel Folau, who had his contract terminated by Rugby Australia last month over a social media post which included homophobic content. Folau started a campaign with the GoFundMe website, who today shut down the fundraiser in which he was seeking $3 million towards his legal battle with Rugby Australia. Maria Folau reposted the campaign on social media on Friday. Australian netball great Liz Ellis has slammed the sports leaders in Australia after they refused to sanction Maria Folau over the issue. The former Australian Diamonds captain Liz Ellis wrote on social media, "There is no place for homophobia in the game." No damage or injuries have been reported after a powerful magnitude 7.5 earthquake hit a remote area of Indonesia's Banda Sea. The deep quake was felt strongly in parts of Indonesia and in East Timor. People were sent fleeing into the streets. It also shook the Australian city of Darwin, some 700 kilometres away, prompting evacuations from shops and offices. No tsunami alert was issued. Senior seismologist at Geoscience Australia, Jonathan Bathgate, says there could be more tremors to come.
Certainly possible to get aftershocks from an earthquake of this sort of magnitude, very likely. Whether there's a bigger earthquake to come in the sequence is something that we don't know.
Australian seismologist Jonathan Bathgate. The Australian national broadcaster is mounting a legal challenge against a federal police warrant and is demanding the return of files seized during a raid. Earlier this month, a group of police officers went to the ABC's head office in Sydney with a warrant to search databases for items relating to a series of stories known as the Afghan Files. The ABC is asking the Federal Court of Australia to declare the warrant invalid and wants an injunction to prevent the police accessing the seized files, which are being held in sealed envelopes. It's also challenging the constitutional validity of the warrant. It's coming up to 5 minutes past 6. Olympic champion Mahi Drysdale is encouraged by the return of the New Zealand rowing 8, but says they still have some way to go to medal at the Tokyo Olympics. New Zealand has concentrated on smaller boats in recent years, meaning the men's 8 has fallen off the pace internationally. Drysdale and Hamish Bond are trying to change that, and a 4th place finish in Poland shows they are on the right track.
What we've taken from this World Cup is we have the speed to match the best eights in the world. In every race, we were the fastest crew over 1,000 metres of the race, but where we were weak, 750 to 1,000 metres of the race, we lost far too much.
Mahi Drysdale, New Zealand's women rowers, dominated on the final day of the latest World Cup event in Poland, winning 4 gold medals. The Warriors have confirmed the early release of Solomone Kata to fellow National Rugby League club the Melbourne Storm. The 24-year-old centre played the first 6 matches of the season for the Auckland-based club, but has not been selected for their last 7 games. The Tongan and former Kiwi international played 93 games for the Warriors, scoring 46 tries. And the Black Caps captain Kane Williamson has been threatened with suspension if the team bowl their overs too slowly again at the Cricket World Cup. Williamson was fined 20% of his match fee and the other players 10% for a slow over rate in their narrow win over the West Indies at the weekend. Match referee David Boone ruled the Black Caps were 1 over short of their target after time allowances were considered. The Black Caps play Pakistan in Birmingham on Wednesday. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Peter Lamp looks back at the weekend's sport. Apart from the cricket, Zoe George and Justin Gregory look back on the weekend's cricket. World Cup, that is. Kit Hayham takes a look at writing history from a feminist perspective, and we have a window on the world of measles making a global comeback, especially in Ukraine, where it's killed 15 people already this year. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. For Northland, showers, some heavy, possible thunderstorms in the east overnight and early tomorrow morning. For Auckland and Coromandel, mainly fine, however showers northeast of Auckland City, about northern Coromandel Peninsula and Great Barrier Island, where some may be heavy with possible thunderstorms overnight. For Waikato to Kapiti, including Bay of Plenty and Central High Country, fine weather. Gisborne, a few showers. Hawke's Bay, Wairarapa and Wellington, a few showers, particularly from tonight until midday tomorrow. Showers gradually clearing tomorrow afternoon and becoming fine. For Fiordland and Southland, a few showers about the coasts, mainly fine with morning frosts inland. For the remainder of the South Island, mainly fine with morning frosts, cloudy periods and isolated showers about coastal Otago, coastal Canterbury and Marlborough today. Chatham Islands, cloudy periods and a few showers, clearing for a time tomorrow. You're with RNZ National. It is 8 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Operators and former employees say the Civil Aviation Authorities is imploding amid reports of high staff turnover and a toxic workplace. The Civil Aviation Authority has come under increasing scrutiny, particularly after admitting its oversight was not up to scratch in the wake of the fatal 2015 Fox Glacier helicopter crash. But when it comes to speaking out, many operators and former employees say they fear their business could could be shut down if they talk. Tess Brunton reports.
Toxic, inhospitable and crumbling. That's how the Civil Aviation Authority has been described by several former employees. None were prepared to go on the record, saying they feared retribution. A senior aviation industry operator spoke out on the condition of anonymity and asked for their answers to be revoiced by someone else, saying they're worried about their business facing fallout. They say the CAA is ineffective when the industry needs a robust but fair regulator.
Unfortunately, the rules are not keeping up to date with new technology and development. So, of course, operators are applying for exemptions or trying to find other ways of staying in compliance. But the regulator just can't hold enough staff to deal with this. It's too busy fighting fires inside its own organisation.
High staff turnover, a focus on paperwork rather than on-the-ground risk management, and a toxic work culture are some of the problems that operator described. They say trust is in short supply between the industry and the regulator, with many operators either not reporting or pulling their punches, losing vital information that others could learn from. The operator says the staff turnover means a lot of industry knowledge is lost when people leave.
Both the regulator and the operators have to spend considerable time trying to get up to speed, and that just slows the whole process down again. It is becoming more ineffective. We've got inspectors out there who don't know what they're looking for. Some very good staff in there, but they're run so ragged.
The operator says the industry has asked for changes, including video cameras in the cockpit, but to no avail. Independent aviation commentator Irene King says serious cracks are forming in the safety regulators.
The ability to speak out is one of the things that is ingrained in aviation safety. You must be able to speak out with confidence and know that your concerns are going to be investigated to see whether they are valid or not.
She says it's not people, but the antiquated Civil Aviation Act that's the problem.
We have multiple levels of systemic failure going on, and the commentary that you're hearing is just mirroring all of those systemic failures. I'm not surprised because, look, the framework we're working in is at least 30 years old.
Aviation New Zealand Chief Executive John Nicholson says the perception of retribution is just one of his concerns with the CAA.
There's real industry concern at the lack of relevant commercial expertise within CAA, relevant technical experience, and relevant regulatory experience. Three significant areas where we see gaps, where we see training is required.
He wants to get rid of the us and them mentality and focus on collaboration. The Civil Aviation Authority responded to an interview request with a statement, saying the CAA's regulatory actions are often not visible to the public, which can erode the sector's confidence, but it is working to address this. The authority says the permanent staff turnover rate was just shy of 15% for the 2018-2019 financial year, and that a recent staff survey shows 2/3 of employees are extremely happy with their workplace. Transport Minister Phil Twyford says the government is taking the concerns seriously, and whistleblowers can speak to Transport Ministry officials about their concerns. But the whistleblower says speaking out is not easy.
The amount of operators that are too scared to step up and speak and identify themselves. I have some difficulty doing this myself. I'm apprehensive to identify myself because it would have a big impact on the company and the many staff that are employed there. And while the Minister may well give assurances that that won't happen, there are lots of ways which it can happen, and I'm just not prepared to risk it.
The industry is calling for Mr Twyford to order an independent review into the CAA. For Checkpoint, Tess Brunton, Tēnei.
We're getting a lot of feedback on our earlier report on He Puna Waiora, which is Waitemata Health mental health unit, and 2 suspected suicides there last month. Jeff has been in contact to say, my 21-year-old son died 3 days after being discharged from Hill Morton outpatients, saying they could do no more. He was discharged to his doctor's care on the Friday. He was dead by the Monday. That was in 2017, a day that broke my heart. Mental health is broken in New Zealand, says Jeff. Liz has also got in touch, and she says suicides in care, suspected suicides in care, happen because staff believe that if a person wants to commit suicide, it can't be stopped. They think suicides are inevitable. Staff must change their attitudes and belief system. They need to adopt a zero tolerance and understand that timely interventions save lives. They need to believe families who tell them there is a risk. I know this because I lost my son and my brother to suicide, and I worked in the DHB for 2 years as a mental health advocate. Thank you for getting in touch, Liz. And Peter Neem has got in touch to say no hospital board in New Zealand has effective suicide prevention practices. Another family's been in touch about Hepuna. They say, as a family, our experience of Hepuna was that it was shambolic. Nursing staff didn't interact with patients. Family concerns for safety were treated as a nuisance and often not acted on. Patients weren't treated with dignity and the respect they deserve. New Zealanders deserve better. And finally, after our loved one died by suicide, we didn't hear anything from Hepuna, not one word. Now, just a reminder, if you need help in any way, you can call Lifeline 0800 543 354, 0800 543 354. Or you can text or free call 1737 at any time. That number again, 1737 anytime, to talk to a trained counsellor for any reason at all. Changes to boost public confidence in the banking sector are in the pipeline, including an insurance scheme covering bank deposits up to $50,000. The government also plans to look at a tougher regime, making bank executives more accountable for bad behaviour or undesirable banking practices. It's currently reviewing the 30-year-old laws regulating the banking sector to make sure they're up to scratch. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says a deposit scheme is needed to give greater protection to customers.
New Zealand stands apart from the rest of the world in having no formal or permanent deposit protection regime. This means that Kiwis with bank deposits have no protection from the failure of a financial institution, which would be from risks beyond their control. Of course, it's fair to say there is no pressing need for such a regime. Our banking system is one of the strongest and most resilient in the world.
The Finance Minister, Grant Robertson, says one area of focus is whether it's possible to hold bank executives properly accountable under the current rules, and if not, what needs to change.
To ensure that the bank is in a position to have the powers it needs to undertake the work that they go through. That also will include some discussion around the kind of accountability regime we expect for bank executives. This includes looking at the Australian BEAR system, the Bank Executive Accountability Regime, and also the UK Senior Managers Regime that do give some more ability for those regimes to look more closely at bank executive behaviour.
Grant Robertson says they're also looking at whether the Reserve Bank has the necessary powers to regulate the sector.
That is both in terms of the level of supervision, the intensity of the supervision, and then, yes, what might be possible if something is found to be wanting. Clearly, when it comes to bank executives per se, we do not have the kind of scheme that Australia has or the UK has. The Australian BEAR scheme is relatively recent. There have been some examples in the UK scheme where I think it was Barclays Bank in 2018 where there was some fining of the chief executive when conduct did not meet the standards of their accountability regime.
Final decisions on the full deposit protection regime and strengthened accountability standards will be announced early next year. Campaigners against period poverty are calling on the government to offer free sanitary items in all schools. The Union of Students' Associations and Dignity, a company that provides free sanitary products, have launched the Positive Periods campaign, pushing for menstrual education and products to be available in every primary, secondary and intermediate school. They've put forward 3 different proposals based on cost, the cheapest of which would not include primary-aged students. But a health researcher says any government policy must include primary-aged girls. Mediana Johnson reports.
The UK, Scotland and Wales have already moved to provide free sanitary products in all schools. Positive Period campaign lead Jacinta Gulaseikurum says it's time New Zealand followed in their footsteps, but she wants to go one step further.
We've watched, overseas the best policy practices, and our preferred recommendation actually includes 25% of reusable items as well, so that being menstrual cups and period underwear, because we do acknowledge the impact of sanitary items on the environment.
She estimates it will cost over $11 million a year to provide menstruation education and sanitary products, including the eco-friendly options in all schools, secondary and primary. However, the cost would reduce by 25% the following year, as the reusable items can be used for up to 5 years. The second option, at $6.8 million a year, does not include the eco-friendly products, while the third proposal, at almost $4.5 million, would only target intermediate and secondary schools and wouldn't include menstruation education. However, University of Otago public health researcher Sarah Donovan says that any policy must include primary-age girls. She says nearly 2,000 primary school girls get their period a year.
Primary school girls are the least able to manage their periods. In a sense, they're not financially independent, they're totally reliant on other people to provide these materials for them. So if that isn't happening and their family isn't doing it or can't afford to do it, the state could play a role there.
Ms Donovan says the first step needs to be reframing periods as an equity issue rather than a matter of hygiene.
It's a basic health need in the sense that if you're not able to do that, psychologically, of course, it's going to be a very stressful experience for you, and actually educationally, if you're missing school for that reason, that's also an equity problem.
She also wants funding for dedicated research into the extent of period poverty. A Kids Can survey last year found that almost a quarter of women and girls missed school or work because they couldn't afford sanitary items. The positive period proposal has been presented to the Education Minister, Chris Hipkins, who has passed it on to the Minister for Women, Julianne Genter. She says it is a serious issue.
Period poverty is a really important issue for all of us, and we will consider the proposal with interest. I hear from many women and girls who are very concerned about period poverty and the environmental impacts of sanitary products.
Ms Genter says the Ministry for Women is exploring policy and funding options. E te whanganui tara mo te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko Miriana Johnson tēnei.
It's 6:20. Earlier in the program, Gary got in contact and just said we should take mobile phones off young women so that they could pay for their own tampons. Well, Helen's been in touch and she says, I can only assume Gary was having a laugh, as no real man thinks like this. He may like to remove the tampons he must have rammed into both ears so he can hear the rational discourse. Helen says, I know you won't broadcast this, but it felt good to type and to read, Helen. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Imagine waking up in a dark, empty plane and not being able to raise anyone to let you out. That's what happened to a Canadian woman who fell asleep and wasn't noticed by flight crew before they left the aircraft and locked up for the night. Air Canada is investigating. Janet Dirks has the story.
The Air Canada plane was empty when Tiffany O'Brien woke up, alone, in the dark and frightened.
It's a sheer sense of helplessness when you feel like you're locked on this aircraft.
O'Brien was flying from Quebec City to Toronto's Pearson Airport. She says she was in an empty row of seats and fell asleep, but when she woke up, everyone was gone. It was nearly midnight.
And it was completely pitch black. I thought, this is a nightmare, this is not happening.
Then she says, in a panic, she texted the friend who drove her to the airport, trying to explain what happened. I just woke up alone in plane. I'm stuck by myself, alone on the plane. The friend texted back that she called Pearson customer service. Someone was coming, a call she described to CTV News.
And I said her plane would have landed 2 hours ago. She texted me that she just woke up. I said, I don't know what's going on, but she's at the airport.
And then my phone died.
O'Brien began looking for ways to escape and says she was able to enter the cockpit.
I'm so scared that I'm going to touch something that's wrong, but I knew I had to do something, and I found the flashlight, and I was just so happy. That was the best moment ever.
Then she says she managed to open the door of the plane, but the drop to the tarmac was steep. She was eventually rescued by ground crew. This passenger rights advocate says this is a rare occurrence, but it raises serious security concerns.
If this would have happened with someone else who may have different intentions, injury could have resulted. The passenger had access to the cockpit and could have hypothetically turned on the aircraft. That would not have been a great thing to happen, to say the very least.
Air Canada confirms the incident. The passenger was left on the aircraft after the flight, and the aircraft had been parked. Air Canada is investigating but won't provide details. O'Brien has hired a lawyer.
And And that was CTV's Janet Dirks reporting on CNN. Final plans have been revealed for the earthquake strengthening and redevelopment of New Zealand's oldest stone church, the Taranaki Cathedral in New Plymouth. The $15 million project includes a standalone education centre, which will examine the church's role in the land wars and be a focal point for reconciliation between Māori and Pākehā. But as our Taranaki Whanganui reporter Robin Martin found out, not all parishioners are thrilled about it.
The Taranaki Cathedral, formerly known as St Mary's, was built in 1846 out of local volcanic rock. It played a pivotal role in the Taranaki Wars of the 1860s and gave shelter to Pākehā civilians while European forces camped in its grounds. The cathedral has been closed since February 2016 after being identified as an extreme earthquake risk. The head of the Anglican Church in New Zealand, Archbishop Philip Richardson, says there are two key elements to the new design. The first is moving the two-storey vicarage, which is currently rented, forward from its existing site so that it engages more with the cathedral proper.
And it's going to be turned into a space for hospitality and for the community to gather and to celebrate. It's the place really where food can be had, where people can have a drink, where there can be interaction. So if there was a wedding or a tangi on this site, it's the place where the wharikai or the food would be engaged in.
Archbishop Richardson says an education centre that had been envisaged as an atrium will now be a standalone building. Te Whare Honona, the house that binds, has been designed in conjunction with the Ngāti Te Whiti Hapu and will play an important part in making sense of the church's role in the Taranaki Wars.
Inevitably, this church stood on one side of that conflict, and that's an important part of our history. You don't move forward by avoiding that history. You face into it. You try to understand why things happen in the way they did, and through that understanding, you try to forge a different basis of relationship going forward.
The chairman of the Ngāti Te Whiti Hapu, Trenton Martin, says the whare's design is significant.
Symbolically, in terms of the way the matting of the design of how it's a pattern that helps us to interlock and with the main beams of the ceiling of supporting each other, and then you've got the side panels of it's very much like raranga, which is weaving, and it's weaving two cultures together.
Mr Martin says that at a hui designed to cement the relationship between the church and the hapu, the spirit of reconciliation was clear to see.
We were very emotionally moved by the whole aspect, because there were ladies and gentlemen within the parish within their 80s and 90s, and they had tears as they were coming across to join in what we call the hariru, the completion of our ceremonial that day.
The cathedral's remediation and design manager, Jenny Goddard, says plans for earthquake strengthening are complete, and once the outstanding money is raised, it's expected it will take about 2 years to reopen St Mary's. But not everyone is thrilled with progress. Anne Street, a volunteer at the parish thrift shop, thinks priorities need rethinking.
When it was closed just for the earthquake strengthening. Nothing else. There was no mention of any package as it became, like moving the vicarage forward and the atrium. There was no mention of that. First and foremost, I'd like the cathedral to see that opened again and people able to get in, and then these other things happen.
Fellow volunteer Elaine James questions the value of the education centre.
I think if you're going to spend money on reconciliation, it would be better spent at Parihaka. Honestly, I really do. It's really run down. Oh, spend it on the housing for people out there. I think that would be, to me, more of a reconciliation.
But parishioner John Lander, who had just dropped off a bundle of second-hand clothes, is feeling much more upbeat.
They've looked at every aspect of it, including local iwi, the community, and what the parishioners want. So I think they've got a really good balance, and what they've come up with, I think, will be iconic, and it'll be a real treasure for Taranaki. I guess with change there are always challenges, and sometimes people need time to adjust to those changes. But I think overall people are very, very positive.
A new grant of $1.5 million from the TSB Community Trust means the cathedral has raised about $8.5 million towards the redevelopment. That includes a $5 million contribution from the Provincial Growth Fund, which is conditional on an education centre being incorporated into the design. I ngā mutu mo te hōtaka o te ahi pou nei, ko Robin Martin ahau.
And I have been waiting so patiently for this story this evening. So finally tonight, the dulcet tones of grey seals. It turns out the marine mammals have the ability to copy speech and songs using the same production mechanisms that humans do. And as a study in Scotland found out, they're pretty good at holding a tune. Mia Wormsley reports.
Researchers at Scotland's University of St Andrews have found the marine mammals have the ability to mimic speech and songs using the same production mechanism as humans. The three seals, Zola, Gandalf and Janice, were first trained to imitate common seal sounds. Then the pitch and tone were slowly shifted to replicate human-like speech. Those behind the study hope it could be used as a new model to study speech disorders by providing what they call a better understanding of the evolution of vocal learning. Using seals as test subjects overcomes the serious ethical issues of studying humans. You cannot isolate a newborn from birth and control their oral environment. But seal pups are naturally separated from their mother after 2 or 3 weeks. The researchers told Reuters the study could help identify which sounds help slower learners to develop and use that as a blueprint for working with humans.
So cute. And you can check that story out online or on our Facebook page. And they sound a lot better, I think, than the staff Checkpoint choir. Thank you so much for joining us today. Don't forget, you can look back at our stories online, especially the visual ones. And you can catch up on the news of the day on rnz.co.nz/checkpoint. Be on our Facebook page as well. And also rnz.co.nz, our homepage. Catch you tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Armed Defenders Squad and police negotiators remained at an Alexander Avenue property in Napier, suburb of Onikawa. The government has announced a scheme to protect people's bank deposits and a stronger regime to ensure bank executives are held accountable. And a University of Auckland lecturer wants staff trained in how to handle students who express extreme views on campus. Our next news is at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
American strike would have serious regional and international consequences.
Lately with me, Karen Hay, is your late night eye on the latest headlines and the people who are making them.
This is one of the raft of prizes and awards that are administered